It's fascinating to see the absolute deepest corners that astronomers end up sitting at, whether it's in their own research or if they are still active astronomers, to logistics, geo stuff, they track satellites, or they track rocks, or they deal with money, or they move to educating people, or they became like absolutely outstanding, fabulous managers. Really, it's crazy. Like I said, the very, very deep corners. You would think that, most of them are going to be in like software companies or SaaS or things like that. And no, really, people go everywhere. It makes me happy and it makes me feel valuable, like we got a really valuable education.
Welcome to the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. I'm Joseph Ahern, one of the co-hosts, and I've been a data scientist for over 2 years.
And I'm Jeff Silverman, one of the other co-hosts, and I've been a data scientist coming up on 8 years now. And our guest today is a friend of Astronomers Turned Data Scientists, one of our co-organizers of this winter session, Eva Noyola. Welcome, Eva.
Hello, guys. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to start by telling us how you got into astronomy?
So my mother claims that my first word as a baby essentially was Nuna, which is Luna in, moon in Spanish. I think that may be an urban legend, but it sounds to me like I like the subject from an early age, probably. The first time that I remember saying I wanted to do astronomy, I was 8 years old. So it was relatively early. So, at some point in middle school, I'm like, one has to be a physicist to be an astronomer, therefore physics. Physics is what I want to do. And, there was never like much of an alternative. So I would say early in school. It came with a package.
What did you study in grad school then? And then what was it like after grad school until figuring out that you could do something with data science?
Yes, so I did physics in Mexico. I didn't say that I'm from Mexico. So I studied undergrad there in the National University, which is a really big place. Again, I already knew I wanted to do astronomy, but it helped that for historical reasons, Mexican astronomy was founded by a man and a woman. The woman was a Turkish woman that married a Mexican mathematician, and he took her there, and she founded Mexican astronomy together with Guillermo Haro, two very big people. And for that reason, a bunch of women, when there were very few women in the physics degrees, gravitated to astronomy because they're like, there's a lady there, right? So the astronomy in Mexico has a bunch of women. So I had a bunch of like female. That made it very cozy from the beginning. So unlike other people, for some reason, I was not like scared of moving on and doing other stuff. I don't know why. Some people are don't. I was like, sure, of course I'm going abroad. And so I ended up applying to mostly southern US locations I was in a long distance relationship at the time. And I ended up, being accepted here in Austin, in UT, for the program here. And it was very funny because, they tell you Texas and you think, whatever, tumbleweeds and the desert and whatever. But I came to visit as a prospective student, and it turned out to be like, it looked very different to what I had ever thought. So once I came here, I was very open as to what I wanted to do. And it was recommended to me that there was this new professor that had just showed up and had no students. So I should go talk to him. So I ended up choosing kind of the thing that I ended up doing because of that, more like because the guy was open and new and he seemed cool. Mind you, he's my friend until this day, so not a terrible choice. But that ended up putting me into observational dynamics. That's what he did at the time. Eventually, he kind of turned cosmologist, but I stuck to dynamics and observation. So I ended up focusing mostly on globular clusters. And so I did a lot of observational work in that. So that was the work of doing my PhD. And once I graduated, I went to one of the Max Planck Institutes in Garching in Germany, near Munich. And I continued working in that, but using the fancy European telescopes. So I was there for like 4.5 years. It was a longish postdoc. And then there was a chance at that point, the one that became my boyfriend here in Austin became my husband while we were living in Germany, and eventually we were summoned to Mexico. We both got positions in Mexico and decided to try it out. So I did another postdoc there. But then the lure of Austin came back and they wanted us back here. So we ended up coming back here and I became a research scientist for, hard to count because the pandemic happened, but 8, 9 years, something like that. And it was around then, right before the pandemic, that I decided that I wanted to move to data science. So it was a peculiar road. It was longer than most. Most people don't stay in academia that long, but I did.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I know you for a long time, and I think I might have to check the statistics, but I think you are the person that we've had on the podcast that has the biggest sort of number of years between PhD and moving into data science. Like you said, doing a couple of postdocs, pretty long-term research position at UT. Yeah, just kind of curious, what made that change in your mind? I know we had talked a number of times over the years of you thinking about it, maybe being interested, and then not. And I've had that with other folks that have postdoc research positions as well. So sort of over that time period and towards the end of your academic career, sort of what made that final decision of yes, I'm going to go full in on going to a tech industry or data science related role.
So it's funny that you say, because needless to say, data science was not an option when I graduated. And, so for the most part, the people that wanted to move outside of academia when, around my time, they were either going into education, the vast majority of them, or industry. But I think even the tech buzzword didn't exist as such. So it was either instrumentation stuff. I remember some people working for instrumentation. Maybe somebody called themselves an analyst of some sort. But honestly, really, it was very sparse, and it was very uncharted territory. So I honestly, as a student, I'm like, I want to stay in academia. This is my dream, and that's what I want to do. And honestly, I did great. I had a fabulous time when I was in Max Planck, and for me, it was very important to come back to Mexico because it was my alma mater, and the fact that I could work there and work with people there and students there and all of that was very enriching. And coming back to Austin was my other alma mater, and Austin is a city that I love, and I had a bunch of friends here. So none of those times I was in fleeing mode. Mm-hmm. But eventually, I was hired to come here for a specific project, an instrument project, actually. I managed to continue doing my science. And the first time I thought of leaving is because, I was going to have to move into some money. I was applying for grants and all of that. The problem is that I got the grant. I got an NSF grant. So that delayed my departure because it's like, wow, you get one of these things that is so hard to get. I'm going to actually work it, which I did. But when that ran out, I'm like, I don't want to do this forever. This is really, I'm very fortunate that I got this. It was great. I'm very thankful for this, but I'm done. And by then, all of you guys had already started, doing this switch. So by then, it was different. I had a bunch of examples, successful examples of many of you, particularly here in Austin. I swear there were easily 15 people that I could point to, that were working in tech jobs. So it felt super doable, honestly. So that's what made my case weird, because people from my class, let's say, from around the time I graduated, that moved a lot earlier. They may have done, say, one postdoc, a short postdoc, and then they moved. So yeah, that made me a weird one, but there you go, it worked.
Yeah, so when we hear about data science positions that are in person, probably the most are in the Bay Area, and then Seattle has a good amount. That's where I'm at. And then, of course, maybe the big cities, New York, Chicago, yeah, exactly. Maybe Los Angeles too. I'm not so sure. But then Austin comes up as in my mind as the next. I don't know. Maybe it's higher than one of those. What do you think is the reason for Austin jumping out? Is it the university there, or are there other reasons why it's become some sort of data science hub?
Yeah, it may have been a happy coincidence of sorts that I think the fact that Dell was here could have been a big driver. That is a big tech company. By the time I started looking, Apple had already opened the campus here, and that is already, that's another big one. And then we have these companies like mid-size, they're not huge, but like Indeed, and the one that collapsed everything with Windows recently, I forgot the name.
Cloudflare?
Yes, thank you. There's a few of those that are not humongous, but pretty big, to the point that they can mess up the entire world on a given day. One of them. So I think it was this happy moment when a bunch of these were either moving here or they were established, but they starting to do data stuff, We had other stuff like National Instruments, but funnily enough, they never embraced the data hoopla because I have a bunch of friends that were working there. So it's not even that all the companies embrace this, but I get the feeling that it became a very friendly startup place, essentially. It's cheaper than California, and it's cheaper than anywhere in the West Coast or New York. So, it lends itself for like, you want to do this, but, it's a cool place, but not too expensive. It probably everything. And it has a big university that is like churning out, little kids willing to look for jobs all the time. So I think it was a happy place in that sense. And I have to say, I don't know if you have seen the chart of tech jobs in the last, it went down a pretty serious cliff everywhere, but you can see it here too. so I'm waiting to see if this is a hype thing or if it really stays as a big home. It looked a lot more promising 2 years ago than now, if we are being honest.
So we've talked about your getting into astronomy, what you did as an astronomer and as an astronomy researcher. Tell us a little bit about applying for jobs, getting that first data science role, sort of what your experience was there. I know you mentioned, you started doing this sort of alongside the pandemic, which was not an easy time. Curious to hear sort of how that path went for you as someone who I think also, again, thinking about comparing to some of our other folks we've interviewed, someone who did have a long research resume, a long academic resume. Was that helpful, hurtful? I've definitely heard folks concerned about ageism, straight up just ageism of like, I'm in my 30s or 40s and applying for my first job in tech, but I'm going up against people coming right out of undergrad. Is that good? Is that bad? I would argue that you could spin that as good. You've got a lot of experience, but you have to get that in your resume in the right way. So I'm curious sort of your experience and view on what you saw.
Honestly, I will be brutally honest here. I think I locked out in this chart that I told you about. I was hired on the way up.
Yeah.
And I think that absolutely helped me. Because indeed, people don't care about the fact that you have been there. They literally do not care. So I think ageism, I locked out in the sense that the first job that I got was, somebody I know gave my resume to somebody else and they gave me I did get a bunch of interviews, mind you, and a bunch of people, it seemed well. I was actually very far in a couple of interviews when I ended up taking the first job that I had. So maybe it was a matter that it was going to happen because there were so many hires happening. But I got the feeling that it was such a different path to the usual, to the others, which are more recent graduates with, one job on their back. Like if you don't have this one industry job or outside of academia experience, that is, in my opinion, the biggest hurdle, even more than age. That's what I think. So getting that first, like I said, you foot through the door that first time, it's bigger than anything else. Because once you have experience on absolutely almost anything, then you look like, okay, fine, you're one of us, right? Almost regardless of your age. So there's that. Now, because I took a very unorthodox way of doing things, I started, I asked a bunch of friends. I don't know, I get the feeling that most of us have some guardian angel. I had one, most certainly, that literally sat with me and told me, take these classes, learn this stuff, study these things. Here's a list of questions that they are likely to ask you. Look at this type of thing, blah, 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 blah. For example, one very useful thing that he told me, because I wouldn't have done it, is when they tell you the requirements for a position, they're like, that honestly, don't take that as in face value, right? Like of course, you're not going to have the experience exactly that they're asking because you're going from academia, but there are many things that are super equivalent. So don't let that deter you. Like, don't let that list put you off from applying to places, right?
Yeah.
So again, I may have been lucky because back in the day, hiring was a lot fluffier than it is now. So I'm not sure that I would have gotten the interviews that I, now that I got then, to be fair. The other thing is interviewing it's a thing that you have to learn. And that's what I tell people when they're reading to, it's like, you are likely, even if you don't flop your first interview as such, which I did, I thought I would flop my first interview. But even if you don't flop, you're not likely to do particularly well because it is something that you have to train. Like you're not going to show up to a sport and suddenly be great at it, as athletic as you are, right? Even if you're good at speaking, even if you're very smart and you have wonderful training, the jargon takes a while, the comfort takes a while. You learn how to answer some questions. Like they're no longer out of the blue things. It's like, oh, I answered this last week or whatever, right? So please, like getting interviews, take all of them. I don't care if the job is not interesting. I don't care if that's really weird. I don't care if the coding exercise that they give you seems completely pointless and out of your depth and whatever. It will be useful for you to do it, even if you know that for sure you're not getting the job, right? But all of those serve for training. So, a lot of people are going to be wasting your time, but you can waste their time a little bit too, like for this stuff, even if it doesn't pan out in the end. So yeah, I mean, it does require patience, that's for sure. And again, never try to be a good fit to things. Like don't ever think that is your worst enemy, thinking that it has to be a good fit. Also, don't be picky. Like people is like, I would love to be in geo tracking, where I'm like, sure, it's good to have, you know, goals and dreams and train yourself for certain things. But seriously, that first job, you have to take whatever comes. Honestly, every job is gonna teach you stuff for sure. So don't be picky either.
What was the first job like that you were able to do, and then what other jobs have you had since then?
So actually, the two positions that I've had since I left academia have been called data analyst. They technically are not called data science, even though they're part of like data science groups, and they really deal with all the tools and all of that. So the first job, yeah, they're both data analyst of some sort, senior data analyst of some flavor. But man, I learned so much. Like in one of them was the data science group of a company that has a suite of tools, software, and services for people that have businesses. They start a business, so they filed all the things with the state, but they have a bunch of services on the side, from accounting to sending you to other legal stuff and whatever. So they take care of a lot of the bureaucracy and tracking, essentially, of a new business owner. So I learned a huge amount, needless to say, because you only have the vocabulary of your long research career. This has nothing to do with the industry. So I am very grateful that I got that job, because it was literally a crash course for me. Thankfully, it was also a position that allowed me to put a lot of my, regular academic abilities to work. They wanted me to document things. I'm like, sure, like that's my bread and butter. I do that all the time, right? That sort of thing, or even train. Like sometimes I had to help with training other people, or evaluating possible trainings, or that sort of thing. That it really was quite similar to what we do. I have to say, there you can take all the SQL classes in the world until you're dumped into a real database that is a mess and nothing makes sense, and the variables have funky names and all of that. So that's, if somebody throws you into that, that's very useful too, because you have to fight your way through learning the dirty bits of SQL, and eventually, you're comfortable with it. And now I am in my position now is with the state. I work for the controller's office in Texas. So I stay with sort of financial stuff to some extent. I deal with a lot of financial data. But I am a whiz, because I am a SQL master as far as they're concerned, essentially, because people have been working there for a long time. Those systems are very old. SQL is relatively new in the public sector. So, they think I'm a wizard, because I can give them their data back in 3 minutes after they ask me for it, because it's a little SQL, thing. So it worked very well for me. Like it put me in a path that turned out to be very nice and comfortable, not horrendously challenging.
I think you're also possibly, I believe, one of the first guests that we've had that has data analyst as their title, which, people ask me about this. They ask us, different, what title should they be looking for when they're looking for roles? I think, every company is different. Every group is different on what they mean by data scientist versus analyst versus a million other titles. And they keep, there's more and more every year. I tend to tell people, rule of thumb, analysts tend to be more junior. They tend to do, less modeling or machine learning, more analytics. I consider myself a data scientist, but I specialize in analytics. So I sort of ride that boundary. I've had titles that include both the word science and analytics or analysis. So I'm curious, sort of what your view is on that dichotomy, if there is one, if it's arbitrary, and sort of how you've seen that reflected in the roles that you've had and what you've done on the job.
I think it's very arbitrary, to be honest. I don't know.
Sure.
You may be too young, but in my day, people really were discussing if you were an astronomer or an astrophysicist, which is
those are
dumb at this
right.
point,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's so silly, but they were really discussing that. So to me, it's one of those.
Okay.
And it's like people just love to label stuff for no particularly good reason. So yeah, they like to say that data science is this thing that has to do with AI or models or things like that versus the other stuff. But I'm like, I'm sorry, I think that's it's like, we're always analysts. Nobody can do data science without having analytics in them. Like that's what we do. It's our bread and butter. Like, what kind? Otherwise, you're literally a data monkey if you don't do any analytics. Right? I'm sorry. And who can construct a model without analytics? Can be done. I'm sorry. So that's it. Every data scientist has to be an analyst, of some sort. First of all. And second of all, I hate the fact that data science is kind of these days equated with AI or machine learning of any sort. I'm like, why? I mean, great. AI, machine learning does a lot of really important things, and it's bound to be everywhere, and we better be super familiar with all of that and all the tools and where things come from. And I've done all the classes and all of that stuff. But that said, a lot of it is being pushed where it doesn't belong, and nobody's asking for it. So you have to be fluent in it, but there's a ton of work, a lot of really important, relevant work that will be done without it. And you need to be good at it too. You need to have all the good foundations of it. And again, I am a scientist by formation, so I dare you to take away that title from me. I am a scientist. I can do research, I can do reporting, I can do all of this stuff in a quality of a scientist that has been doing this for years, right? And I notice the difference with people that are not. It's good to complement with colleagues that do not have this path. They are sometimes flabbergasted that you figure this out. They're like, well, I grew up clicking around and snooping around until I figure it out, because that's exactly what my job has been for decades, right? So yes, in that sense, I dare anybody to question that I am a data scientist in that regard. So yeah, I hate that separation of terms. And I will say this, these data analyst jobs often will be very interesting. Many of them will be super interesting, and they probably will have more clear, obvious, useful applications than the other ones, the ones more hand-wavy titles, right? So you're almost guaranteed to have something more concrete and more bread and buttery and with an impact, like immediate impact.
Yeah, I mean, when I give, talks on careers in data, as broad as that term is, I talk about, analytics being a part of data science, right? That overall umbrella of data-related jobs. And so if you call that a data analyst or you call that a data scientist who does analytics, like, it's still, one of the ways I boil it down is you're looking for signal above noise in messy data, which is like most of what observational astrophysicists do.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And so you want to call that a data scientist and you use a model and you call it machine learning, fine. You want to call it a data analyst and you're, doing analytics on a pile of data, fine. But it's basically the same thing. Yeah. So interesting. That's great. Great answer.
Do you have a favorite project that you've worked on in the past that you're allowed to talk about?
The project that I like the best is when they let go of a mouse and I have to go chase it. Those are by far when I have to figure it out, when I have to put a puzzle together, whatever that is. So, in my current job, the single most fun job was when my main boss, the one that was, is my supervisor and has been training me, and I have been there for maybe 4 months or something, so not a hugely long amount of time, but he was gone. He was long, he had a long vacation or something. So suddenly I'm there and the big bosses are like, oh my God, we need this done. Do you think you can tackle it? So I had to take a deep dive into those databases that nobody labels and nobody gives any maps to anything, right? And I ended up writing some pretty nifty, query that solved the problem super quickly. And I was so proud because it was very quick. It did exactly what they wanted. They asked me to switch things around. It 5 minutes and their answer was there, right? They were impressed, but at the same time, it's like, if this guy hadn't been gone, he could have probably spent, I don't know how long, because he knows this stuff. Like, he probably wouldn't even have asked me, right? Well, I had a blast, and I got to see some parts of the database that I never knew. So those are my favorite type of projects. One interesting one that I did in my other job, I think I can talk about it at a high level. We had this, what is it called, Trustpilot, where your customers, can rate you in different ways. They can, yeah. So that project was connecting the sentiment analysis from those Trustpilot reviews and responses with their actual customer data in our database, which was absolutely not connected in the slightest. And I had to rig it up essentially to figure out the sentiment analysis on one side to their behavior as customers. Like, when did they start? Did they ever upgrade? Did they ever consume more or less, or blah, 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 right? Did they leave after leaving a bad review? That sort of thing. So that was fun because it was like connecting two seemingly very separate pieces of equipment, within the company. So that was fun.
So I want to get back to something you sort of alluded to a couple of times, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more detail of sort of, when you were hired for both roles, were you the first, or it sounds like at least an early data practitioner that was brought in? And, how did you navigate that if you were the first or early on of like, hey, we've been doing, the Texas Comptroller's office is 150 something years old. We've been doing it this way for 100 years. Now you're doing this with SQL or something else. How did you navigate either trying to create new processes or answer new questions or use data in a different way? I know plenty of folks I've talked to are early, whether it's a startup or a big established company that just hasn't had a data team before. How did you kind of navigate that? What was your experience there?
It's funny you should ask, because I think I'm in a peculiar class that is not going to exist anymore. And this is going to be a problem for the following reason. In the public sector, they use really old stuff, as in ancient stuff. Last week, I attended a training that was teaching us about this. It's a mainframe system. And honestly, had I not used, I don't know, Pine back in the day to read my email, I would have been a little more freaked out about this thing, right? It's like, wow, I can work this because I have, but I cannot believe that the public sector is like, all of the public money in Texas is going through this stuff. It's insane, okay, right? But it is. And most of the people, like, I'm not by any means around the oldest people. Like, if you put all the analysts there, I'm a young person. I'm a very spring chicken there. So imagine, right? But my point is, you're bringing a newer, like a more recent graduate to this thing. I mean, they're gonna cry. Working on a mainframe system, that's kind of crazy. And they were talking, and they spent a whole day teaching us the basics of this. I just found out that it exists. It's called JCL, which is this IBM language from the 60s. And that's still what they're using to this day, daily. They run these things to populate, a bunch of tables that are really important, because this is serving the entire state of Texas, I'm telling you. All the public sector and a bunch of other people, right? So it's mind-boggling to me, but I'm like, you bring a younger person, they're gonna flip out. This is gonna be a problem, right? And they will not be able to port things elsewhere. Like that any random person with only the newer tools in their pocket will have a really hard time trying to port it. Like, they won't be able to talk to these older folk that use these older tools. Like, bridging those things is going to be very difficult. So like I said, it has the advantage that I can talk both languages, if you will, right? Try to figure out, and I can talk to these other analysts and get out, bridge the information. But on the other hand, I do look like a wizard because I use this magic, nifty thing that is so quick and wonderful. So, but I think that's super specific to me, like to my generation, and so it was lucky in that sense that I ended up landing there, because it's fun. It's fun to do what I am tasked to do. And the other thing that I'm trying really desperately to bring data visualization to the world, to people. They just like their tables a lot. And tables, as useful as they are, they're pretty hideous to go through, if you try. So it's taken me a year to evangelize super slowly people that, there's this thing called dashboards that can be very useful to you, and they can make your job a lot more pleasant to have and much nicer to present, and blah, 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 blah. And it's hard. So half of them go like, oh, this is cool, I'll use it. And the other half was like, why would I change my ways, right? So it requires a fair amount of patience. But I think I strangely landed in a good place for that, for my age or status or whatever.
You've been helping out with the Astronomers Turn Data Scientist Splinter sessions for at least a couple of years. I'm not sure how far back you started it, but how has that experience helped your perspective, or what have you seen about how ATDS has changed over this time?
That's very interesting. It has been super helpful, mostly to me. The biggest value for me of that meeting is the variety. It's fascinating to see the absolute deepest corners that astronomers end up sitting at, whether it's in their own research or, if they are still active astronomers, to logistics, geo stuff, they track satellites, or they track trucks, or they deal with money, or they move to educating people, or they became like absolutely outstanding, fabulous managers. Really, it's crazy like I said, the very, very deep corners. You would think that, most of them are going to be in like software companies or SaaS or things like that. And no, really, people go everywhere in it. All of that. So it makes me happy and it makes me feel valuable. Like we got a really valuable education. I don't know. I have the theory, but because our data is very misbehaved, because we can't handle, like we cannot rig any of it, right? It's out there and it does what it does. And the best you can do is improve your instrument at best. But like the photons are gonna do absolutely whatever they want to do, right? So I don't know if that makes us nimble, daring, adventurous. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but that's what this meeting, seeing the people that go through and all of that. And another thing I have to say, the generosity. Maybe other fields have it too, and I just know this one because this is my field. But the embracing of people is like, I'll connect you, I'll help you out, I'll give you a referral, I'll explain this to you, whatever. People are very, very, the amount of people that will lend a hand is pretty high. And I love that this is kind of a hub for that. People do their own networking and whatever, but this is a pretty wonderful place to do that, right? To do this networking and this lending hands and paying it forward and that sort of thing.
That's great. As a originator of ATDS, it's always much appreciated. It makes my heart warm to hear that kind of awesome praise. So thank you very much for those nice words, Eva. One thing that we always like to ask people is sort of, if you have advice that you would give folks from astronomy looking at jobs in data, whether it's in the public sector, like where you are, either advice you might have, told yourself a few years ago, or, folks nowadays, since, as you mentioned, the field's changed, the field's always changing, the number of job openings ebbs and flows, obviously, with time and the economy. But yeah, what pieces of advice, would you give folks looking to get into it?
One is very sad, and it truly breaks my heart to give it, but I have to give it because I've been attending these conferences now. There are this circuit of conferences for the public sector, that's where I go now. And it's very different to the other stuff, but anyway, it's still entertaining and very interesting in many ways. Get familiar with the AI jargon. Whether you end up working on it or not, you really need to be familiar with this stuff because that is the buzzword. I am convinced that this stuff is a lot less useful than they make it sound. Like there are some fantastic user case for this, many, like numerous ones. But those are not the ones that I'm seeing. I'm seeing the ones where they are like forcing it into systems where it is not needed and is almost causing more troubles than it's fixing, honestly. So it drives me nuts and I hate it, but it's everywhere. Everybody wants to hear this stuff. They want to hear you say the things. So learn it. It sucks. You have to learn it and you have to be relatively fluent in it, right? And the other thing is the jargon changes crazy quickly. Like from a few months ago to now, for example, I just discovered that there is these things called AI agents, and that's the rage as of the last, 2 months? I kid you not, or from the summer. So like, just keep up with it. It's as annoying as it is, you need to be in the hype for the interviews, purely. I'm hoping and praying that once your job starts, they actually will make you do the useful things because they need the useful thing done, right? Like people need what they need, and that's what you're going to end up doing. But they need to make sure that you can speak the hoopla, because otherwise they feel insecure and we're outdated and blah, 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 blah. So that's one that it's super annoying, but it is. The other one is don't go too specific on the tools. Pick yours. Like if you're happy with Python, then drill on that. If you're happier with whatever else, R, they both have their advantages. Whatever you're comfortable with, do one of the main ones, because that's what people will be using in places. And they are super happy to substitute one for this. If they know you're familiar with one, they're happy to say like, okay, it's fine. You'll pick up the other, right? SQL is a must. Like, I'm sorry, but it's rare that you wouldn't want me to use it. So just learn it as best as you can. And like I said, the best way to learn this stuff is by doing, and not with this pretty set of data sets that are for you to try. I mean, those are good to start learning, but the only way you're going to learn is like fight with the very messed up variable names and not marked keys and all of that stuff, right? Like that's the only way to properly actually learn. So you do have to learn that. And for visualization and stuff, I mean, I've had to do dashboarding in both of my jobs. There are a bunch of things out there, and the better ones are expensive, which is very annoying. So learn the free ones. You'll pick it up sooner or later. You click around and you find the buttons. So learn, there's the Google one and there's the Microsoft one. They're ugly as nothing else. I hate them. But they will teach you. And honestly, go to a friend, go to a relative, it's like, do you have a table laying around there that or a couple of tables that, can I make something pretty for you? And do it. Honestly, figure it out on the go with like real data. Like I have a cousin that is kind of desperate. She has a bunch of Excels, I'm gonna try to help her. In this case, it's just because I want to help her. But if you're trained and trying to get to places, ask people for the random Excels and play with them, literally. And that's how you will learn dashboarding. Because once you go into a place, you'll figure out whatever they're using, but you need to have some experience in clicking around these buttons and figuring out how to make these different visualizations that are very typical in almost any place you go. So, generically, you need to have the basics of some programming, whatever you decide, the SQL, and some visualization. I won't tell people to do specific ones, just pick one and learn it.
I think that last bit is something that I've heard a lot of people asking over the last 6 months or so. And this goes back to your point about the job descriptions. So many job descriptions now for a data scientist are like fluent in Tableau or BI, or BI tools or exactly. Looker or one of these. Yeah. And I've had a lot of academics being like, I don't even know what these are, let alone, do I need to go learn 6 different dashboarding platforms? And I immediately say no.
No.
I think your recommendation about finding some of the either open source or free ones and playing with those with real data is great. The other thing that I point out is a big chunk of being fluent in dashboarding is being able to make good plots. And some astronomers, many astronomers, I think, are good at that, right? Using colors that don't clash, colors that are colorblind and visually impaired friendly, using, labeling your axes, making the fonts big, right? Those things that I feel like grad students learn pretty early on from both positive and negative reinforcement of like, oh, my advisor's plots are garbage and I can't follow it. That kind of basics is stuff that you can then, like you said, you got to find the right button to increase the font size in Looker, and it's at a different place than it is in Tableau or, a Python
how
plotting.
How you join 2 of those things to pull them and how you overlay things, that is the super annoying part. But we all publish papers. We all have to bring those charts up to snuff, right? It won't be harder than figuring out this stuff. But like our plots in our papers were vastly more complicated than any of those dashboarding things, right? So just be familiar with the buttons, and once you learn one, you can find your way through the others. I've used maybe 4, 5 different ones. It takes you a little bit of time, but Google is there for you. Yeah, so I think those are the basic tools. And recently I had another astronomer asking me like, they are so specific in the ads. And I'm like, no, don't listen to that. As long as it's an equivalent tool. You say, I don't use this one, but I know how to use this other one. So, I can port it. You can have the conversation when you are like, what type of applications do you want? What type of dashboards are you having to build or update or keep up or whatever happens, right? So then, but you know the basic tools and you can carry the conversation. So, yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, thinking about the years you spent in academia and then now your recent years in industry, what have been some of the things that you've enjoyed about your change to industry and maybe some things that you didn't expect?
One thing that I realized immediately as soon as I got my first job was that oh my God, did I love the bite size level of things? You could do things and be done in a matter of 2 hours or even 3 days. You're done. Like there's a task and you're done and it's done. And you don't need to come back to it. And it's not going to take months to 3 years to wrap it up. So that is a liberation in the back of your head that I cannot say how refreshing it was, right? You don't have stuff that is hanging for 6 months. You might. Some of your projects may be long and they may be blah, blah. But there's a lot of daily, coming and going work, this report, this design this thing, like I said, this dashboard, this whatever. So you sometimes it may take you, the first time you do it, it may take you a week to figure it out or whatever, some days. But eventually, my point is, it's bite-sized, it's short, it's out of mind. It could be recurring, there may be things that you have to do every month, every quarter, whatever have you, but it's not this long, like my paper is ready after 6 years type of thing. Like so that was super refreshing. I would say that's one of the big differences that I love. and well, it varies from job to job. Some other jobs may be different, but I close my computer in the afternoon and that thing is gone out of my head and my soul and everywhere until the next morning or the next Monday. I do not carry that stuff home with me. Very rarely. Occasionally, it could be something that I'm like, dinner time, and I thought of the solution to this query, right? Whatever, but it's rare. So you walk a lot lighter through life. That's my experience, at least.
That's great. That's always one of the biggest differences that I talk about is, the sort of, like you said, bite-sized chunks of projects and work and tasks, which is, one of the biggest differences with academia in general. Looking forward a bit, it's always hard to plan or look into the crystal ball, but sort of where do you see, yourself maybe in a few years in the field? And, if you think you're going to stick with sort of the public sector, where do you see, that going, whether it's state of Texas specifically or sort of public sector / data more broadly?
So again, no crystal ball. So this is all whatever, wishy-washy. But I'm in a very different position to most other people, right? In my case, my husband has a solid gig that it's, he has a steady job security that other people may not have. So that is one thing. And he, makes enough money that I don't need to get like the absolute highest paying job that I could possibly get. I was okay with a lower level. So in this case, when I after I got laid off from my first job, it took some months. It was rough because everybody was laying off. So suddenly the post essentially disappeared, and some that I even applied, they disappeared as I was in the middle of the application. It was pretty dire and terrible. So that's why I eventually looked at the public sector, and I'm like, well, it's just I need a job, right? But once I got there, oh my God, the job security is really not bad. I'm sorry, but I keep in touch with a bunch of people from my previous job and from friends and all of that. And the turnaround is pretty serious still, right? So on one hand, you get used to it, and the more experience you have, the easier it's going to be for you to move on to the next situation. So that's good. But at the same time, it's a bit harrowing. Like sometimes you're making plans, you're moving cities, you have a kid, whatever, you buy a house, things like that. And suddenly, like knowing that it's not a done deal, that is your job is not there for sure. It's a big deal. Well, in the public sector, it's a lot more of again, everybody can be fired any day, technically. But in reality, all the people that I'm working with have been there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. My main boss, this person I was talking about, is going on their 39th. That may be a bit excessive. But my point is people are pretty comfortable there. And the other thing is the public jobs start on a relatively discrete situation with salary and all of that. The benefits are astoundingly good. Like I just remember what I was paying for health insurance in my other place compared to, the coverage that I have, and the retirement is infinitely better, and plus a bunch of services extra that they have and they give. So eventually you're like, well, that technically is not in the dollar amount, but it is, right? Mm-hmm. In reality, it is. So once I say, I'm like, on paper, it looks very different, but not very different. There's on paper, I went down, but in reality, I'm very close, actually, and in a much more secure and comfortable situation. And the other thing is that staying around, you quickly, the public sector rewards sticking around. Mm. So you get more holidays and you get a bonus for being there for a longer time. And, because they want to retain people, you're more likely to be brought up chains and titles and things like that. So for example, this year I got a raise that was higher than the standard, the one that the entire agency had. And I think it was because precisely they're losing tech people. Mm. So they they said like your title got reclassified, whatever. So the people that have my title, all the ones that have my title, got a bigger bump up, right? So suddenly it's just a year later and it's looking considerably better, right? So they reward being a good worker. They appreciate the people that it takes a long time to hire in the public sector too. It is a very slow process. So they really, really don't want to have to do it again. Unlike in the private sector where it's like taking socks on and off. This one is not. It takes a while to get things set up and all that. So for my age, my situation, my husband's situation, my children's age, all of that, honestly, I look very comfortable here. My biggest fear is if it gets too monotonous and I get bored. I don't see that happening now. I have these all, and these are projects that some of them I took on myself. People are not very good at keeping track of things. And I'm like, I need clean data. I need to be able to use this stuff. I want to actually do mini models for things, and I can't because the data is not complete. So now I put it upon myself to like clean up, and this takes forever because bureaucrats are bureaucrats. So you tell them, we need to update this, we need to finish this, we need to wrap this up, we need to fill this little number that is missing here. They don't like it, but it will happen, and it will take me a while. So meanwhile, I'm entertaining myself with a bunch of these little cleanup jobs. And the other thing is that I've noticed that a bunch of people move internal to the agency, and there are some parts of the agency that are pretty cool in the sense that they do forecasting and much more analytical analytics, right? My analytics are very specific because I work with auditors, so they're specific to audits, essentially. And again, I'm learning a lot and I'm pretty happy, but I can see how, say, in 5 years, I could be a little bored with this, and maybe I cleaned up enough and I set up enough and I trained somebody or whatever. But I'm hoping that, maybe I can move within the agency or within the public sector, even if it's, because then you get to know all the systems. And like I said, some of those systems are pretty archaic. So there's some value to knowing this old stuff that is weird and you already can navigate it. So yeah, for now, I think I see myself hanging around the public sector in the future.
All right, we're getting to the end of our time. Eva, do you have any final advice for our listeners?
I'm going to quickly tell a story. As part of my PhD, one of the things that I did, and again, that's specific to me, I had to come up with a new technique to measure something. I really come up with it kind of from scratch, something that has been measured the same way for 50 years. And I had to come up with a new way to do it. And as far as I know, again, I don't read the archive anymore, but that's for PH, but as far as I know, nobody has changed that in the last 20 years. So whatever I did is still kind of the reference, right? Doing that was so crazy valuable because it makes you very, like I said, very wary of your data. Like you don't trust data if you see it there. You learn to distrust your data, which is a very healthy thing. You need to really make sure that the stuff that is there, it's reliable. A. B, you need to build tools from scratch, which again, you may not have to do, but if you have to do, you have done it once. And that comes with like testing. Like it really makes your testing brain gets very acute when you have to do one of those things. So I realized that I do that a lot, that it comes natural to me. And you pick up issues and you pick up mistakes and you pick up whatever. So I don't know, I never thought about it back in the time, when I was doing it. But I realized that this is a specific example of how astronomy really trains us for battle and any battlefield, really. It is a mindset, it is a mindset of beware of the dirty data, learn to build tools, learn to even, like some people say, take a piece of wire and then put some tape on it and put it around something. That's how I did my PhD, and it may not be the cleanest way, but it made me a very nimble person. I can really move between different platforms and different data sets and things like that, and try to rig things. It teaches you to rig things. So I don't know. I hope people appreciate that, learn to like that is the value. That is the value of working in our case in astronomy. Again, people may be the same thing in material sciences. I have no idea. I know that in astronomy it often is like that, and that makes us very valuable. So I wish we collectively can figure out a way to put this or make the world understand this value that we have because we have this type of education. So yeah, that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Eva, for joining us on the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share so that you can find out when we release future episodes.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Of course. Thanks, Eva. And thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.